In this week's Q&A, I talk about the pros and cons of an eyedropper conversion, some of the most polarizing pens out there, and why don't pen companies just make their nibs perfect? Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it is April already. What the heck? I know it's April Fool's Day today. I'm not doing anything crazy for April Fools. A couple of years ago we did an April Fool's thing and we had a customer that wrote us that was really kind of offended. They had, Asperger's, and they couldn't distinguish well the joking and stuff like that, and it really kind of hit me, and I was like, what is really kind of the point? I've never been a prankster myself, so we don't do anything for April Fools. It just doesn't really sit right with me anymore. So nope, this is gonna be straight on the up and up. Everything I announced today is all totally legit, so let me just go ahead and get that out there. Now, this week has been kind of busy. We did physical inventory on Wednesday. In fact, as I'm shooting this right now on Wednesday morning, my team is working hard to count everything on the website. So I would love to be out there with them helping with that, but I got a commitment to you all as well. So balancing that juggling thing every day. Balancing the juggling thing? I don't know, whatever, you get what I'm saying. So that's been good. We've had some cool stuff going on on the personal side of things. Had a really great weekend. It was Easter weekend last weekend. My wife and I, celebrate Easter, so that was kind of cool. We were very involved at our church. We're in the church choir, so we sang on Friday night and Saturday night and Sunday morning. Very involved. I mean, we're talking like 2 to 2.5 hour services here, so very involved. So that was really cool. Spent a lot of good family time. Got to work on setting up a swing set for my kids, which if you followed on Snapchat, you've seen some of that. So just, good, wholesome, life balancing kind of stuff. I work really, really hard, but at the same time, gotten a lot of good family stuff in too. So I don't really publish as much of that stuff as I do the pen thing. So, but yeah, that is a really, obviously, very important part of my life too. So that's been really good. I feel a lot of good, fulfillment kind of going on in that way. Speaking of Snapchat, that's kind of been blowing up. It's been kind of crazy. So I went home on Friday, and I was like, oh shoot, I talked about that in Q&A, and no joke, I had 140 friends on Friday afternoon after the Q&A went out, and I was like, oh boy, I really committed myself to something here. So I was kind of trying to keep up throughout the weekend while also balancing out the family stuff, and as it is right now, I got 50 people waiting to be my friend and all that. So it's cool. Snapchat has been blowing up. It's been a lot of fun. I've been getting some real cool back and forth, so that's really neat. And Snapchat just did an update too to make it easier to chat back and forth. So that's kind of cool. So anyway, that's been fun. We got 2 new folks that are starting our fulfillment team. We've been hiring for the last couple of months, going through that process. Finally got a couple of solid folks who we think are going to fit well on our team. Got some experience as well, so they should be able to hit the ground running pretty well. They, at this point, should have started yesterday because it's Wednesday, so when I'm recording this, but it's not going until Friday. So anyway, Robbie and Chris. So we're excited about them. They're going to be a great addition to our fulfillment team, help you to ship your orders out even faster with that slightly ridiculous amount of care that we like to do. So that's pretty cool. And that puts us at 38 people now, and we're still hiring for an executive assistant, and that's going to put us at 39. Now, that's granted, we have 38 now, it's 35 full-time with 3 part-timers, so it's we're continuing to grow. It's kind of wild. It's kind of I feel like I'm holding on to the rocket ship at this point, but it's a lot of fun. Pen stuff, talking about that, we got the Homo sapiens Dark Ages that's been trickling in a little bit in the midi size. We're getting the rest of them. It's been kind of, the way that Visconti is ending up, getting all their stuff, is it doesn't come over in one massive shipment, so it kind of trickles in a few nib sizes here and there, and so we're not able to do a big, here's a release of all the pens. It's kind of trickling in, and it's kind of frustrating for all of you, I fully realize, so I'm sorry for that, but we are getting them in, so that's pretty cool. So that's awesome. The Rembrandt, Visconti Rembrandt Special Ops as well, we should have launched it at this point by the time this video publishes. Again, didn't get as many of the fine nibs, at least, that we wanted, so those probably have sold out at this point, but we are going to be getting more in. It's kind of we were holding off until we could get more, and then the not wait list, we don't do a wait list, but the email notification list kind of keeps growing as we keep getting more in, and we're like, well, at some point we just got to launch it. So, you know, other retailers have had it out for a couple of weeks, and we're not really helping anybody by holding them all back at this point, so we're going to let them go. We also got the Diatramentis Document White ink, which, you know, people have been asked. Actually, there was a Q&A question I'm not going to answer this week about white ink. It's the best white ink that's out there. It's not like a pure white. It's very much of a milky kind of thing, but it is a permanent white ink, you know, that has a purpose, can be used on dark paper and things like that. So that we finally got in. We ordered it literally months ago, but we just got it in, so that's kind of cool. We also have a violet ink that came out with the white one. We got that a little while ago, but didn't talk about that a lot. Then the other big thing is the Edison Nouveau Premier Water Lily, and so we got that in. They have been moving. Everybody's calling it unicorn barf because that's what it's been affectionately coined in the Edison fan community before we launched this pen. So if you hear it called the unicorn barf pen, that's what it is, but we're officially calling it Water Lily. And then also we found out that we're going to be getting the Pilot Decimo in sooner than we expected, so look for news on that pretty soon. I'm hoping next week, so that's pretty awesome. We'll have a video out on that pretty soon. So no update on the Lamy Dark Lilac. We're told like early mid-April still, probably looking mid-April, I don't know. With these big releases and stuff, it tends to just kind of come. I know like Wonder Pens in Canada has it. I don't know why Canada got it so far ahead of the US, neither does Lamy USA, so we're trying to figure that out right now. But trust me, they're coming. As soon as we get them, you're gonna know. It's gonna be like the hot pen of the year to get, so we ordered plenty. So I'm not expecting that we're going to sell out immediately. So you will get it, just wait, it's coming. Yeah, it's coming. All right, let's get into the questions, shall we? Kick it off with some pen and writing questions. Susan D on Facebook actually had a couple of questions that are completely different, so I'm going to take both of your questions, Susan. And before I get all into the questions, I do want to say I've been getting a lot of really good questions, a lot of good questions. It's been hard to only answer as many as I have. This week I have 9 questions. I'm intentionally trying to keep it to slightly fewer because I've been going so over on time. I just can't stop myself. That said, I'm really sorry if I don't get to your questions. You're asking great questions. Keep it up. Your persistence will pay off. Anyway, first question. This is from Susan D on Facebook. When cleaning pens, I see you pull the converter off the nib units. I'm afraid to do this. Won't it eventually weaken the connection and potentially cause a leak? Okay, so what you're talking about, Susan, for those of you who are newer or maybe don't know what's going on, so you're talking about a cartridge converter pen, such as this Edison Water Lily. If you pull the converter off the back, you know, you're talking about, is that going to affect the connection here? Because it's plastic. Is that going to affect the connection as you do this over and over and over and over and over again over time? The short answer is yes, it will eventually weaken the connection. The longer answer is, you know, if you don't do it, then the only way to clean out the pen is to flush and fill and flush and fill and flush and fill and flush and fill like this, which I would argue could wear down the piston mechanism just as easily as it wears down the other end. So the whole idea behind the cartridge converter is it's meant to be taken off. You can put cartridges on, you can put the converter back, you can take it off. Personally, I think cleaning the pen without the converter is way easier, and if you value your time at all, then you will quickly pay back any of the cost of your time with what it would cost to replace a converter by the time you'd wear it out. It's actually, you know, I'm a bad example because I use so many different pens. I don't use like one pen with one converter for a year or two. I'm sure within a 6 month to a year to 2 year period, I don't really know exactly, it depends on the use of your pen and how much you clean and stuff like that. Within a relatively medium time frame, boy, is that a general statement, you will wear out the converter, yes. You will need to replace it, sure. It's $5 on this pen. Some are more expensive from other brands and so on. There's different durability, levels for different converters and whatnot. But yeah, it's meant to be replaced. So it's not meant to be this permanent fixture in the pen. Now granted, most cartridge converter pens are a lot cheaper than, say, a piston filling pen or a vacuum filling pen that have more permanent mechanisms installed. So it all kind of washes out. But anyway, it's not like you're going to be replacing converters every month. It's like once a year, maybe. You're probably going to lose it or sit on it and break it or something before you would really wear it out. So I wouldn't sweat it too much. With the benefit you're going to get from pulling the converter off, using a bulb syringe, to flush it out, and then when I clean the converter, I usually just fill a little bit of water in the converter, put my thumb over it and shake it like that, do that a few times, cleans out the converter way faster than it does flushing and flushing and flushing over and over again. So over time, you're going to more than save your time just in what you're going to save in hassle. Susan also had another question. So Susan from Facebook asked, I have been using fountain pens for 3 years, and my husband got his first fountain pen, a Lamy Al-Star, a few months ago. Up until now, I let him try out some of my less expensive pens. He's been eyeing up my 14 karat gold nib pens. Will those softer nibs be at risk of being altered or damaged if I let him use them? And do the nibs adjust to the specific writer? I touched on that second question a little bit before, but I can touch on it again. I'll go to your first one though. So the softer nib, so you got a 14 karat gold nib, whether it's 14 karat, 18 karat, whatever. Yeah, generally gold nibs are softer than steel nibs. So steel nibs are great not only because they're less expensive, but because they're generally more durable in terms of like pressure writing than a gold nib. So somebody who's newer, maybe is coming over from the ballpoint or rollerball world where they're used to bearing down a lot of pressure when they write, it's better to start them on steel nibs because if you, first off, it's harder to ruin a steel nib from too much pressure than it is a gold nib. And secondly, if you happen to ruin it, you're not really out as much as you would be if you bought a really expensive pen with a gold nib. So right off the bat, good job there. You've set him up well for success there. But at the same time, you know, he's been using them for 3 months. Okay. At some point, he's going to be ready to, you know, start using gold nib pens. I would say probably, unless he's like a real just, you know, oblivious to what he's doing with his pens, he's probably going to be aware enough if you give him a little bit of coaching, a little bit of hands-on training about how to write with less pressure with a gold nib. Now, generally, you do want to be more delicate. That's part of the whole benefit of writing with a fountain pen, is you don't have to bear down on it and then cramp your hand and then have all this stuff going on. You can just, almost by the weight of the pen, allow it to write, and you're just directing where it goes. You're not having to give a lot of pressure. So that's how the pens are supposed to write. So if you are writing with it with the proper amount of pressure, it shouldn't be any problem at all. Now, if you have concerns about that, obviously this is going to be like a very personal kind of call that you're going to have to make with him about, is there a risk there of him kind of bearing down too hard on it? Now, granted, this is a pretty easy situation because you're married, and chances are if he does something to ruin your pen, he's going to want to make it right. You know, he has obviously a lot invested in your happiness and well-being for the long term. So I would like to think that he is going to, you know, do something to make it up to you, buy you a new pen, whatever, get you to take on a vacation or something. I don't know, whatever your situation is that you happen to be able to work out with him, but I would think that you got the trust built there. And, you know, I'll expand this question a little bit just so it's not so narrow just to a husband-wife kind of thing. If you're letting a friend or another family member or just even a stranger, it's always good to just like preface it a little bit and say like, hey, you know, this pen's really expensive. I just want to, you know, I'm cool with you using it. Just let me give you a little bit of direction here about the best way to use it. That way you can know and yada, yada, yada. If you can kind of set it up well, you know, try not to do it in like a pretentious way that's like, well, this is such an expensive pen and, you know, you don't know how to use it. You don't want to be like that because that's really just turns people off. And you want to be welcoming and all that kind of stuff. So have more of like, hey, you know, just this is a writing instrument. It's really kind of, you know, it's something that takes a little bit of practice and all that. So let me help you out, you know, if you're cool with that. And then if they're like, well, I don't need it, just give me the pen. You're like, well, no, it's my pen. And you know, if you're going to treat it like that, then I'm not gonna give it to you. So that kind of thing. But so let me kind of tie in the second part of your question to this. So do the nibs adjust to the specific writer? This is one thing where I've been a lot more vocal in the past about like, no, I think that's really kind of an overbaked old world idea of fountain pens is like, you know, it's very romanticized, like your pen will fit to your individual writing style. Well, no. So I'm a little more practical than that. A pen is a tool, right? Like a pen is not a living object. It's not like, you know, if you ride horses, okay, that horse, you make a connection with that horse. It's a living being. It thinks for itself. You make a connection. You learn that horse and its style, and it learns you and your nuances and your communication that you have with it. So yeah, your horse, if you ride horses, will adapt to you just as you will adapt to it. Okay, so that's one example. I don't know why I went with horses. It's just the first thing that popped in my mind. I've ridden a horse once in my life and it was terrifying. I was a teenager and I couldn't control it and it was going all kind of crazy ways. So I know that it takes some practice, right, to learn how to ride a horse. Anyway, another analogy, let me go with, say, what did I put down? I gotta write down what I actually put because I've got like 50 things that are going in my head now. So I said like a musical instrument or maybe like a race car or even like a golf club, right? So something like that that's literally just a tool. It's an inanimate object. Yes, it has its own, you know, materials that it's made of and it reacts to what you do, but it doesn't learn. It doesn't learn how you are handling it. All it's going to do is react to whatever you're doing. So a fountain pen is no different. You know, if you have a fancy sports car, right, and you have one driver that drives it one way, another driver that drives it another way, the car is not learning your driving style versus another one. All it's doing is reacting to the experience and the nuances that the driver has. So the driver learns how to use the car way more than the car learns how to drive it. So same kind of thing with a fountain pen. Your fountain pen is really not learning how you write. It's just reacting to you. So if you write with a lot of pressure, the tines are going to bend out more and it's going to have a softer nib. It's going to write broader over time. Eventually, if you do it too much, you can spring the tines. All it's doing is reacting to what you're doing to it. The only real kind of difference that, you know, that you could kind of argue like, well, it does react, you know, over time your pen will kind of write. Yeah, so like there's an iridium tip that's on the nib. That's what's actually touching the paper. Eventually, with your writing angle and pressure and all that kind of stuff, you're going to wear down that iridium tip to a degree. They're pretty hard wearing, but over years and years and years of steady, heavy use, you're going to wear down that nib at some point. Then you could consider like it's adapted to your writing style. And if somebody holds it at a different angle, it's not going to write the same because it's not in that sweet spot. Technically, if they hold it at that same angle as you, it's going to write the same. So this is where like I think it's been romanticized of like every pen if it's, you know, but this whole idea of like, you know, if you lend your pen to someone else and they write their signature with it, it's going to ruin your pen and you're not going to be able to write with it the same way anymore. That's bogus. Like that is just totally not true. Now, the exception to that, I think that statement tends to be generalized and say like if you lend your pen to someone that has no idea what they're doing and they spring the tines and destroy the pen, then yes, they've ruined your pen. But if they're treating it properly and just writing with it like a normal, you know, kind of how it should be used within its parameters of its physical properties, then I would say, yeah, that's a really overbaked statement. It's not that if you lend your pen to somebody, it's going to get ruined and all this kind of stuff. They need to be, you know, talked a little bit, and this is where it ties into your first question there, Susan. You know, the person that you're handing it to needs to be kind of properly instructed, but it's not like somebody writing with your pen for a little bit. It's going to completely change the experience unless your pen is reacting to it being, you know, abused in some way, whether intentionally or not, you know, to being writing with too much pressure or something like that. But in general, I think you don't have a lot to worry about. I would say let your husband enjoy your pens, and honestly, if you get him into nice pens, he's going to want some for himself, and you can kind of share and expand your own collection and access to pens too. So you got a personal motive to help get him in there because, you know, you get to share your stuff, and I'm just saying, Rachel's got pens that I don't have, and we get to share and trade and stuff, and it kind of works out nice for everybody. So anyway, that's all I got. Katherine S. on Facebook says, I see a lot of questions from folks who want to know if a pen can be eyedroppered. What I would like to know is why would you other than massive ink capacity? Pros and cons of an eyedropper versus a pen using any other filling mechanism would be welcome. Okay, so I'm not going to get into like all filling mechanisms because that would blow this question into an entire Q&A, which I can't remember if I ever did. I used to do themed Q&As like way back in the day. I got away from them because it was too hard to come up with a whole Q&A with themed questions. I really can't recall. I probably should have looked that up. Whatever. You tell me. You can look it up if you remember, and I've done it. I don't know. I've covered a lot of filling mechanism questions over the years that I've been doing Q&A. But anyway, I'll cover it now. So this was kind of a different kind of question, a little spin on the eyedropper thing that I've gotten before. So eyedropper. So for those of you that don't know what an eyedropper is, forgive me, I'm going to get basic here for a second. Eyedropper is essentially when you have a pen that it's a cartridge converter pen generally, and if you have a cartridge converter pen that you don't want to use a cartridge or you don't want to have a converter, you can then to remove them, you can, if the body is all sealed up, You can then put an O-ring on it or maybe some silicone grease on the threads. In whatever fashion you seal up the threads, you fill the body with ink, and then you close it up. That leaves you with a large ink capacity, larger than you would have just in this tiny little converter or a cartridge. And then, so that's the main benefit. So that's what you talked about. Why would you do other than having large ink capacity? Well, the whole large ink capacity thing is kind of funny, because what happens is the larger your ink capacity, the larger, the greater your chances of having issues with it when the ink level gets low. So you get burping and spilling and things like that, because as the ink level gets low, you get a lot more air inside the pen, and the ink in their state becomes unstable. Like, it's hard for it to equalize and stuff like that. It's actually an interesting kind of debate that I've had even with some folks in the pen community about, is it the heat from your hand that expands and causes it to burp out? But then if you look up like the physical properties of air as it expands, is it expanding enough to really move the ink that much? There's some debate about that. I think as much of the debate is when there's a lot of air in there, just the ink, which is mostly water inside the pen, just becomes really unstable, and the act of moving it around causes it to just kind of do that. So I don't really know exactly the physical properties. It's something interesting to investigate. I'm not a scientist, so maybe if you are a scientist type out there, that would be an interesting thing for you to dig into a little bit. Why do eyedropper pens leak when they get low? But whatever the cause, it's definitely something that happens on a fairly consistent basis. It's not like a guarantee it's always going to happen, but when it does happen, I'm like, yep, there it is again. Across all kinds of eyedropper pens, the larger the pen with the ink capacity, the larger it's going to happen. So it does kind of like bring up a question of like, well, if you have this, 4 milliliter ink capacity, which is not what this Preppy is, I just went with 4 because that's what it is. That's the number I gave. For example purposes, let's say it's 4. If you got a 4 milliliter ink capacity and any less than a milliliter and a half, it starts to become unstable and burp all the time, well then you got to keep refilling it. You really only have about a 2.5 millimeter ink capacity. Well, it's still greater than a regular ink capacity. It's still greater than a converter, cartridge, whatever. So it does still, you may not be getting like 6 times the ink capacity that you normally would, but you're still getting like 2 to 3 times. So it's still, that's a lot of the benefit. Some of the other things going on though, cost could be one benefit. So for example, Platinum Preppy, cheap pen for all, really on all accounts, $4, $5, depending on the nib size you're getting and whatnot. The converter itself is more than the cost of the pen. So if you don't want to have, especially if you want to buy a bunch of them and ink them up with all different colors, which is very common with a Preppy, you can buy a pack of O-rings and a silicone grease, and you can eyedropper convert your pens way cheaper than you can by using converters or thus cartridges. So that is one reason. Cost effectiveness. Obviously, the more pens you do it to, the greater the thing, but that's how it works. So that is one reason. Another one is convenience. So a pen like the Kaweco Sport, right? So it is too short to take a converter, except for the Kaweco converter, which I forgot to mention earlier. We are going to be carrying the Kaweco converters. It's really weird though, I probably should have mentioned this separately anyway, but the Kaweco converters, they're better than the converters they've had before. They don't fit all of the metal pens. They're kind of inconsistent. We're still trying to figure out what's up with that. It's fitting all of our brass ones, but it's only fitting certain nib sizes of the All Sport and the Raw Sport, and we're like, what is the pattern here? I don't know if it's a design thing or an inconsistent thing, whatever, but either way, it fits the plastic ones, which is the ones that you can eyedropper convert anyway, so I don't know. So anyway, so you can use a converter, this converter in it, or you can use a cartridge. But this is a very common pen for eyedropper conversion, right? So if you eyedropper convert this, it's a convenience factor over using cartridges. Or, well, in this case now you've got the converter, but it hasn't been available until like basically right now. So it's a convenience thing. You don't have to refill the pen quite as often. You don't have to deal with cartridges. You get more ink options than if you were just using cartridges on a cartridge-only pen such as this. So that could be a reason why you would do an eyedropper conversion. Another one would be aesthetics. Like for example, I got this little Kaweco here, so I'm just gonna, it's got a clear body. This is the Ice Sport. And, if I have a little ink here, I'll do a little demonstration for doing an eyedropper. So, this is just a little inky water. It's not real ink, but it gives you the idea of what's going on. So I eyedropper convert it. Granted, I haven't sealed up the threads on this, but for demonstration purposes, that will get you the idea of what's going on. I'm going to dump it out as soon as this video is done anyway. You get to watch it slosh back and forth, and that's just kind of cool. You know, there's a neat little, like, ooh, aesthetic thing to it. So there's that reason. For no other reason, you just like to watch the ink slosh back and forth. That is enough reason for you to eyedropper convert a pen. So there's that. And then the drawbacks are really going to be just kind of the burping and then having to clean it out, you know, because you're getting the ink all over the body of the pen. If you have an ink that's kind of clingy, when you go to clean it out, it's going to be a lot more to have to clean out, especially because you're going to be more inclined to eyedropper convert your clear pens, your demonstrator pens. And then, of course, ink is going to get all in the nooks and crannies. And if you have a clingier, harder to clean ink, it's going to be more of a pain to clean out. So you're just not going to want to change colors nearly as often. So that's kind of the drawbacks. But that gives you at least a little bit more insight into the whole eyedropper conversion thing. So hopefully that helps you out. All right, oh my gosh. I can't pronounce this. Harlotofloyola on YouTube. Wow, a lot of O's and L's going on in your screen name there. Anyway, your question is, I've been considering buying a Parker Sonnet, but the pen seems to inspire a lot of hate as well as fans. What other pens have you found are extremely polarizing? Well, okay, I haven't really seen like a lot of like heavy polarization on the Parker Sonnet, but you know, maybe you've done more of that. I don't even carry the Parker Sonnet regularly. I used to a couple of years ago, and now I don't because it's just not, it didn't sell that well and hasn't been that much demand for it. But I'm sure within the Parker community, there's probably some of that going on, and people have their reasons, right? Like, especially the more expensive the pen you get, the more critical people are going to be, and you're getting some people that are completely love it, like Visconti gets some of this, oh my gosh, this pen is amazing, it's my favorite, I love it, and you know, maybe even sometimes they don't love it that much, but they just justify it in their own mind because they paid so much for it. That could certainly, you know, what do they call that? Buyer's, oh gosh, there's a name for that, buyer's bias or something like that. Like when you pay a lot for something, you feel like it's better because you paid a lot for it. I'm not saying that's the case with Visconti. Let me backpedal a little bit there. But you know, just any expensive pen that you're buying, you could easily say like you're going to be totally in love with it because you just pay a lot for it. Now there's that, or there's other people that completely swing the other way. They pay a lot for a pen and they have crazy expectations because they paid a lot for it. So generally speaking, when you get to real expensive pens, they can be polarizing. The Sonnet is can be a little bit more on the upper range. It's not like a luxury, super high-end pen, but it's definitely a little more on the expensive end when you get to the gold nibs and stuff like that. So maybe there's some of that going on there to analyze your situation. But I would say the pen, well, the brand of pens that gets debated the most, hands down, and you probably guessed this, it would be Noodler's. Noodler's is very different than the situation that I just talked about with the more expensive a pen, the more polarizing it has a potential to be. This one, because it is so inexpensive and it's so accessible to everyone, that is part of the reason why it gets just a lot of mixed feedback, is because there's just a lot of people buying the pen. And also because it has a flex nib, and you see people that are really good at using flex pens that are posting things on Instagram and YouTube and stuff like that because they have, frankly, talent and they're using it, and they could pretty much do that with any tool. You get people that really just don't have as much practice or talent or experience or whatever you want to call it, that buy the pen thinking they should be able to just right out of the box use it as these more experienced people have. So, you know, that, and when a pen is this inexpensive, you know, definitely the QC is not going to be the same as that of, say, a higher end brand. So there are some unrealistic expectations that can come out of that sometimes. Or people just genuinely just don't like the pen. So you're going to get a lot of feedback, and the more people hype up something, so that's a complete pendulum swing in the other direction. When you have a pen that really could be charged more for, but it's so inexpensive because Nathan Tardif of Noodler's fundamentally wants these pens to be as inexpensive as humanly possible, as sustainably possible, I should say. So he charges very, very little for his pens. Thus, people feel like, you know, they should just work, and sometimes maybe their expectations are not set in the way that maybe they could be. So yeah, and then people end up buying the pen that maybe wouldn't be interested otherwise, but they just want to try it, and then they whatever, throw it in the trash or whatever, that kind of thing happens. So yeah, it's just really interesting when you get into these kind of things. I think another one that tends to be really polarizing as well is the Lamy Safari or Al-Star. And yes, I'm showing you the orange one, which is not available and hasn't been for many years. I'm literally just like bragging to you right now that I have one, just because I can. I'm just being a total jerk about it. So it's got this kind of triangular grip thing going on. It's not technically a full triangle because it's just 2 indentations and a rounded bottom, but it's essentially a 3-pointed grip. People who have a 4-fingered grip maybe don't like it, or other people just don't, they think the grip is too small or whatever, but very popular pen, especially a popular starter pen. But a lot of people love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Some people, the grip, they just can't, so they don't. And they talk bad about it. Or aesthetically, some people think that the colors or whatever, it's too juvenile looking, or they don't like the paper clip looking clip on the pen. So, you know, this big kind of duckbill, you know, paper clip thing that's going on with the Lamys. It's totally valid argument. You know, everybody's got different tastes. That's why there's so many different pens out there. And I think that's the thing to come across with all this stuff. Another one is the Lamy 2000. So this is a pen, this is less of a pen that gets flack because of its design or value or something like that, but more for its function. It has a nib that is ground in a very particular way so that it makes it, it's a little more sensitive to having a sweet spot if you rotate the pen too much in one direction or another. So it really takes some getting used to. So it gets talked up a lot by the people who kind of get used to it and adapt to the pen and really love it. Those who are newer to it have kind of heard a lot of great things about it, but then get into it and it's not as much of a falling in love at first sight kind of thing. So this has actually cut down tremendously since Drew and I put out our video on the Lamy 2000 nib. I will say that. So education has a huge factor here. But definitely the reputation was starting to run away a little bit, and it was getting kind of a negative reputation as having quality issues and stuff like that when it really wasn't justified. And so that's why Drew and I put that video out, because we love the pen, been testing it for years, and it's not a quality control issue, so we wanted to kind of straighten that up. It's just a sweet spot issue. So knowing that now has helped a lot there. And then the last thing I would say is QOTW to a degree, not quite as much, but there's some people that just don't like the kind of hexagonal thing that's going on here with the cap. Octagonal, sorry, it's not hexagonal, it's octagonal thing going on with the cap. They think the pen is too short, too thin, you name it, but it's a very popular pen, inexpensive. A lot of people eyedropper convert it, so it gets talked about a lot. You know, but other people just don't like it a lot. And you know, for whatever reason, the QOTW nibs, especially the broader sizes, you get kind of into a baby's bottom situation, tends to kind of go dry a little bit on the upstroke. That's another complaint I hear a lot about the QOTWs. You know, again, it's like a $20 or $25 pen. How nitpicky can you really get? You know, as nitpicky as you want, I guess. It's your pen. So, yeah, those are kind of some of the big ones that I think I hit on. There's other ones. Obviously, every pen, you know, has like pros and cons, and people have opinions about it, but those are some of the ones that I hear talked about the most, especially those who kind of cross over that initial hurdle and become like really emphatic about the pen, and then newer people get into it and they, you know, because they don't get over kind of that initial hump, they end up completely swinging the pendulum the other way, and they're like, well, I tried this pen and it was terrible and I hate it and I don't know why everybody talks it up so much. You get a lot of conversation about this on Reddit especially. That's where a lot of the good you know, discussion really comes out, because people get into such heated debates about it. So Fountain Pen Network, you get some of that too. It's really kind of everywhere. So I'm going to instigate that a little bit as I get into the question of the week. But that's those are my opinions. So at least my observations of kind of what I've seen in the community. All right, got an in question for you. This one's from Amber H on YouTube. So I just very recently got into fountain pens, and I started off with a Pilot Metropolitan Medium, and I went through the cartridge in only 3 days, and I don't write prolifically. How long do you think a 3-ounce bottle of Noodlers would last me? Okay, so I have a Pilot Namiki cartridge right here, which I've measured out, and it's a 0.9 milliliter ink capacity. That's what comes in your cartridge. So if you are using it, okay, the medium, it's actually kind of it's actually not that broad of a nib, so it's more like a traditional Western fine nib, honestly. I think your paper is going to be a big factor. So before we get into the ink calculations and stuff that I have, your paper is going to be a huge factor. So if you have really absorbent paper, it's going to suck and draw the ink out of the pen a lot more than it would a less absorbent paper. So that's something to take into consideration. I don't think that everybody should expect that with a little bit of writing, you're going to suck through these cartridges all the time. There's factors here that I don't know, Amber, that may be at play. But that said, I'm just going to go off of your situation because it's a real world scenario. So you used 0.9 milliliters of ink in 3 days. So I'm going to make an assumption that you're going to continue to write every day in that same kind of pace, right? Even though that's may or may not happen, you might write more and less and whatever, but I'm just going to assume an average. So this holds 0.9 milliliters of ink. A Noodler's 3-ounce bottle, which is what I'm using to hold this inky water here. It's 3 ounces, so not like quite dead on, but it's about 89 milliliters of ink, right? So it's about 30 milliliters per ounce. That's generally the rule. So doing that math, one 3-ounce bottle of Noodler's ink is equivalent to about 99 Namiki Pilot, whatever brand, cartridge. So that's a lot, 99 cartridges. So if you use one cartridge in 3 days, you use 99 cartridges worth, would last you about 297 days. So close to a full year. So one ink bottle would last you close to a full year. A Noodler's bottle is $12.50. For most of their ones, they have some more expensive formulations of certain inks because the dyes are more expensive and blah, blah, blah. But most of their inks are $12.50 for a 3-ounce bottle. So if you were to take that same cost, now I'm getting a little deeper than you even asked me, the cost of the cartridges, if you wanted to go with a 12-pack of, say, the Namiki Blue or the Black, 12 cartridges cost you $4.40. You're looking at 37 cents per cartridge. So over that year, close to a year period, when you would use one Noodler's bottle at $12.50, you would use about $36 worth of cartridges. Is that really a deal breaker for you? Well, maybe you want the convenience of the cartridges. Maybe it is worth it to you over that year to do that. But, you know, I'm just giving you information here. So you're going to pay about 3 times more for cartridges than you would for the equivalent of a bottle of ink. Now, granted, some ink flows differently than others, so it's not really a one-to-one necessarily, but that's a pretty good generalization there. So, generally speaking, I think one bottle of ink per year is about what most people can expect if they're using the pen with, some regularity. All right, I got a business question. This is from Leslie T on Facebook. I'm watching an old Q&A and you're discussing how you carry brands and pens based on customer interest/demand. Yes, I do that. I think that's good business. How does that jive with your wonderful mission of introducing new people to pens? I'm curious specifically about pen companies that newer users might not know to ask about. How do you balance those decisions? Okay, well, first off, I think generally speaking, there's like a more just like a business macroeconomic kind of thing to discuss here of like, generally speaking, newer, less discovered pen companies are not as good for new people. And the reason I say, or maybe not as, I shouldn't say not as good, not as recommended for new people. Because if you think about it, the pens that are like tried and true and have a great reputation, everybody in the community has them, they're going to be a lot more discussed, they're going to be a lot more reviewed, there's going to be a lot more troubleshooting around them, there are going to be more hacks that people have done around them that'll be fun. I think those are the ones that tend to get recommended more. Things like the Lamy Safari, that's why it has the reputation that it has. Platinum Preppy is another one. Pilot Metropolitan, I had one here, but I don't know where it is now. There's another one. Coeco is another one. Gets recommended a lot to new folks, partly because they're inexpensive, and partly because they just have a solid reputation. People know exactly what they're going to get. They're made consistently, and it's going to be a consistent experience for somebody new into the hobby. A pen, that is much more niche and not as talked about, or maybe is newer, isn't as kind of tried and true. It's going to be a little tougher for a new person because, say it's a newer pen that has some kind of unique filling mechanism or has some unique design aspect to it. A newer person's not really going to kind of know what the standard is or maybe what they should expect. So if there is any type of quality issue or if there is any type of learning curve with you learning that particular pen, a newer person isn't going to have as many resources to kind of get into. They're not going to have as many other people that know about the pen, so when they go searching for it, if there's anything they want to learn about it, it's not going to be as easy to find. So yeah, theoretically, somebody like me with a decent reach and decent audience could talk about these newer things and educate people, but it's just not going to be as widely available to newer folks than the more established pens like the Safari and the Metropolitan and things like that. So I would say that back more in the early days, I don't remember exactly how old the Q&A is, but I've been doing Q&A for, oh gosh, how long have I been doing it now? Over 2 years. Goodness, I've been doing it like 2.5 years now almost. I think it was August of 2013 that I started doing it, 2.5 years. Okay, so my business has changed a little bit in the last 2.5 years, but not drastically. So yeah, in the early days, early days, going back even before Q&A, before this question was asked, I would only carry products that people would specifically ask me for. Partly because money was tight and I had to make sure that I was going to be able to sell the things that I was buying, because just when you don't have money, that's what you have to do. I had enough money to buy the stuff. We've never bought on debt, but that's where it was from a business decision. I had to really make sure that I was carrying products that people really wanted. As the business has grown, we have retained earnings. We can buy things a little more speculatively. We can do some of that stuff, but really it has to do more with my own experience in the pen world. I know a lot about pens. I know a lot about the community. I've talked to a lot of people through various social media channels and so on. So I have a pretty good sense for the market, for what people want, to the point where we can, release a pen such as the Edison Nouveau Premier Water Lily with pretty good certainty that this color is going to be popular. And it has been. So a lot of that is, we didn't have people specifically asking for this, but we just had a good sense of what's going on. It's not that different than anyone who's, an interior designer, or you're an artist or a craftsman, or you're a painter, or you're a photographer, or you are, a clothing designer or something like that. Anything where you have to create based on anticipated demand, it's not unlike that, where, honestly, a lot of the pen companies are doing that. How in the world does Lamy know what their next popular color is going to be? Maybe it's a re-release of a color they've already had. They've done that plenty. But how did they know that a purple safari was going to be popular? It's going to be really friggin' popular, I can tell you that. It's not here yet, but it's going to be popular. Because a lot of people, yes, okay, a lot of people were specifically asking for it. Maybe that's not the best example. But look at a brand like Visconti. Like, they have a lot of pens. They come out with more pens than you can even keep up with, practically. But they are very forward-thinking. They have a good sense of what they are capable of doing and what would be popular. So they can design something and come out with it before people are specifically asking for it. That's more at a place where I'm at now. Yes, I always want to take into consideration things that people are specifically asking for. Obviously, that just makes sense. I'll always do that because that's just good business. But more and more, as our reach is expanding, we do get asked specifically about things that I know would not be a great fit for us. We get asked about all kinds of things just because we have a lot of input from various people. We have a large customer base. We have a large reach on social media and stuff. We get asked about things that really would totally not make sense and are far outside of our mission statement, that we would never want to carry, but people still ask. Doesn't mean we're going to carry it, though. We have to be very selective, and we also have to kind of anticipate, what people are going to want before they even know what they're going to want. You know what I mean? I've done that with things like bulb syringes, the ear bulb syringes. I've done that with things like the ink syringes, and like a lot of the Goulet products that we've come up with have been things that I've anticipated that people would probably want, that maybe I wasn't specifically getting asked for. So that's kind of where more it's coming from these days. But now specifically talking about newbies, to kind of get back to it, I think that newbies are, really important part. I talked about this a little bit last week and got a little choked up a bit about it, about how much it means to me to continue to focus on getting new people into the hobby. That's really always been a focus for me. And honestly, it's something that's really kept me grounded a lot. That's why I've enjoyed Snapchat. A lot of younger people, a lot of newer folks. It's been really humbling and really great to see how many people still are learning about these pens. And in the grand scheme of things, there's there's 7 billion people in the world, and the fountain pen community is like that much of it. So for basically the rest of my life and probably my great-great-grandkids' lives, we're always going to have opportunities continually educate new people into fountain pens. That's part of the upside for me, is we're never going to tap out. There's always a way to teach people more about pens. So that's what I enjoy, and that's what motivates me. That's why I do all these videos with all these, you know, different things, kind of teaching you some of the basics, even Fountain Pen 101 and all that kind of stuff. That's why I enjoy that so much, because I recognized early on that this hobby would not continue on very well without having a strong focus on bringing new people into the hobby. And that's what's been driving me a lot for the last 7 years as I've been doing it. And then for me personally, I find that it helps me a lot because I've seen, you know, just like any niche hobby that you get into, as you get further and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the hobby, it's very easy to kind of run away and find your own kind of little corner of the world, and then you lose touch with kind of everybody in many ways. Like you get really into a certain, you know, material and a certain brand and all that kind of stuff. You become like a specialized, like master at that one thing, but then you lose touch with some of the newer things that are coming out, or maybe things that you're just not as personally interested in as much anymore. So for me, it's been a little, I've sacrificed a little bit on the super depth of certain brands and filling mechanisms, and I've completely like ignored vintage pens altogether, if you hadn't noticed, because that is a whole other rabbit hole that if I fall down, I know it's going to be hard to come back, right? So for me personally, that's what would happen, because there's so much depth there. It's like falling into the abyss, because you're talking about like 150 years of pen history now, with millions and millions and millions of pens that you could get into. I've like put a wall there for myself, because I recognize that is something that I'm not going to be able to serve newer folks, you know, because vintage is tougher to get newer folks into, because there's a limited supply of those pens because they're not being made anymore. You know, and as you get more people into that hobby, it's only going to become more and more limited, right? So for me, it's always been about new pens. Which helps because I get a lot of good information from current companies. They're constantly tweaking and changing designs and things like that, so I can influence things like that. That's why I've enjoyed that. So for me, it's always been about focusing for newer folks. I tend to push the things that are more like the tried and true for newer folks, because the last thing that I really want is for somebody to buy a pen that is kind of less conventional and have a difficulty with it and then write off the whole hobby. I would rather get somebody in with a staple, like predictable experience, they fall in love with it, then if they really want to get deep into it, they start to get into the other things. That's part of why, honestly, I slightly discourage people from getting the Noodler's Flex pens, even though they're very inexpensive. I somewhat discourage new folks getting it as their first pen, unless they have an understanding like, yeah, this is not a typical fountain pen. You know, it's kind of different. They know that going in. But if somebody goes into that and that's their first experience and they just don't get Flex and they can't really figure it all out, that's kind of a tough thing to deal with. And I would not want to make that somebody's have a bad impression just because of inexperience. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, but I'm definitely not like some kind of savant or anything. I don't know exactly what everyone wants. It's still a guessing game for me from a business standpoint. A lot of times it's very educated guessing at many times, but sometimes we carry things and it just, no one cares. Like you think a pen is going to be great for newer folks or more experienced folks or whatever, and it just, no one wants it. That happens all the time. But even still, I think it's still a strong focus on newer folks, but sticking more with the newer folks with the kind of tried and true things. But then again, at the same time, you know, the Pilot Metropolitan, when it first came out, it was a new pen, and I just came right out the gate. You can look, history is on my side on this one. I looked and said that, you know, as soon as that pen came out, I was like, I know this pen is going to be a staple for new people. So I don't know, I'm kind of, you know, coming back on my own statement now as I'm thinking and getting a little deeper into it. But the Metropolitan's a good example of like, yeah, that was a new pen. Not a new brand necessarily, but certainly was a new pen that that wasn't as known about, that I came right out the gate and said, like, this is going to be one of the best starter pens ever. And it has proven to be that over the last 3 years. New pen companies, however, little bit different situation. I've seen, you know, newer pen companies. I'll use TWSBI as an example. They're relatively newer. Even Noodler's, they're a newer pen company. We're talking pen companies that have come around in the last 5-10 years. There's a lot to work out, so it's very kind of speculative for a new person to get into a new pen company. It's better to go with something with a little bit more of a track record. Personally, that's kind of the way I've always gone. And then it's, for me, as far as what I'm going to carry, it's like our mission and values always really play a big part here. I probably didn't talk about that quite enough, but you're talking about how do I balance those decisions? You know, if it's going to fit in my mission statement, is it something that people are asking about, that I get a sense and that's going to make sense within my business, and then I go for it. You'd actually be amazed at the number of things I turn down. All right, personal question. This is from Michael T. on Facebook. Are you a bit of a pack rat? You have a lot of pens, but do you keep every box for every pen? I do, and mine fills a small box under my bed. I feel like that would fill a closet for all of yours. Well, I don't know why you would think I'm a pack rat. It's not like I keep everything or anything. Yeah, so I'm not like a real pack rat. I'm a pack rat for certain things, and pen stuff is definitely one of the things where I'm a pack rat. I do try to purge things at home. I'm definitely like, I have a window, just so I'll get into the insight a little personally a bit here. So I am definitely of like a, you don't know when you're going to need it kind of thing. I am kind of thrifty, you know, and so I tend to hang on to things longer than I should, but it's not an emotional attachment to objects, you know, it's more of a utilitarian attachment. So I'll hang on to things until it like becomes cluttered and disorganized and I just can't, I don't know what it is, or I'm like, yeah, I've had this thing for 2 years and I've never needed it. I thought I might, but yeah, realistically I'm not going to. And then I'll just chuck and purge, and you know, I get that from my dad. My dad does that a lot. You know, my parents kind of pack things in a bit, and then every couple of years he just like does a major purge. So yeah, maybe some of that is just, maybe I'm just wired kind of the same way, or maybe it's just like that's how I grew up and so it kind of makes sense to me. I don't know. Psychologists can analyze that one, but for me, I tend to hang on to pen stuff kind of a lot. I'm not naturally a super organized person. As I'm looking around at my desk at the clutter that's on my desk outside of the screen that you're seeing here. Yeah, okay, I got a little bit of junk here, and so what I end up doing is I definitely save all my pen boxes, partly because every now and then we get like a damaged pen box or something and we need to swap out a good one for it, so I swap out one of my personal ones because I don't really care. Other times it's because, you know, I'm shooting a video on a pen down the road and I want to show the box or something like that. I've actually gotten away from that a little bit, showing the box in my pen videos, because so many of our manufacturers have changed boxes on us 6 months after I do a video, and then you have to do an annotation and it's showing a box that's no longer in existence anymore, and you know, that's been so frustrating so many times. I'm just showing the box less than I used to. But that's just a thing. So if you see a lot of my earlier pen reviews, I show the box, and now I don't really do that because it's just frustrating. We don't really show pictures of our boxes either. It's just kind of a frustrating thing to do with. Unless it's like a really particularly nice box, then we'll show it, and we know it's not going to change. But yeah, so I definitely, I have a lot of pen boxes that take up a lot of space. So I'll end up with this kind of situation. This is a bad example because it's holding a bunch of junk, but I'll end up with like these clear plastic bins that I'll fill with my pen boxes. I have maybe 30 of those around. Yeah, I haven't counted exactly, but I think 30 is probably a pretty decent number, maybe more. Yeah, probably around 30 of those, of the bins that size, filled with empty pen boxes. It takes up a decent amount of space, you know, and I've got it tucked away in various nooks and crannies inside our office here. It's not in my office. So literally, because I acquire pens at such a rapid rate, I'll keep a bin like that off to the side, and as I get pens, I'll just kind of put the cases away in the boxes, and then when it gets full, I'll slap a lid on it, label it, and go stick it away in storage. It's still accessible if I need it, but I don't usually need it at the ready if it's not a pen I've gotten within the last month or so. So that's very much a unique situation to me because I have such an extensive pen collection, and it's kind of my job to, you know all these pens and know the boxes and stuff like that. So that's my interesting situation that I have going on there, Michael. All right, I'm gonna close it out with 2 troubleshooting questions. Haven't done a lot of troubleshooting questions lately, so I wanted to kind of get into it. Let's see here. Camden S on Facebook asked, do you have any tricks to open a stuck bottle cap? So let's use an example here. You got a Noodler's bottle, you got a Jeroboam, you got a Pelikan Edelstein, something like that. So what happens over time with these, and I found this to be with the Roshizuku actually more than most of my other inks. But anyway, so what happens, you use the ink, cool, you know, you throw the bottle around, whatever, hopefully not throw it around, but you know what I mean. And what happens is you get ink that gets on the top of the lid, and you close it up, and over time it can dry out and kind of act like almost like a glue that holds the bottle on there and can, Okay, I'm good. I almost opened it up with it sideways like this. That would have been good entertainment, but been a bit messy. So if you are opening it and you've used it and it's sat for a while, and you know your cap can get kind of crusty and you got to open it off and kind of clean it off, just wipe it off with water or whatever. So for me, what I've found to be helpful, if you have a Goulet grip, I wouldn't buy a Goulet grip just for this purpose because it's really meant to pull nibs, which are smaller in diameter, but it can work for a bottle. So you can get a decent wrapping. It'll get about halfway around an Edelstein cap, and it can give you enough grip to really get it going. So that's pretty good. Another thing that I've used is this grippy stuff. You know, it's the kind of stuff that you line your kitchen drawers with, or you can, you know, they have like jar opening, you know, things like this. It's just basically a grippy material. That's all you're looking for. That can give you a good grip to be able to turn it. If you use like sometimes latex gloves in themselves, rubber bands can work, especially fat ones. A bicycle tire, like an inner tube, not tire, but a bicycle inner tube, if you have one of those handy, which if you're a cyclist like me, who's also kind of a pack rat, you hang on to your old bicycle tubes because you think you're going to repair them one day, but you never will. So there's that. There's, you know, basically anything to grip. You know, any type of glove that you have, like sometimes a glove, like the yellow gloves you use for like cleaning around your house, that can work really well too. That's about it. You just need to get a good grip on it and then yank the thing. That's literally about all I have to say about that question. Some people run like warm water under the cap and do it. I've never really heard of that being a super successful thing, but I guess maybe it's worked for some people enough to where if you're endlessly frustrated, you could try that. It's not like it's frozen or something that waters are going to do it, but you know, it could be something for you to consider. The only thing is, if you're going to do that, run water over it and you have a bottle that's like got cardboard or a paper label on it, you don't want to get the label wet, so I wouldn't do that. But for a bottle like Edelstein, it's, you know, it's a printed logo on there and it's not going to matter if it gets wet. Cool. Next question, next and last question. This question is from Gary over an email, and this is going to be a meaty one. Okay, so it's good. Gary in his email said, a good fountain pen nib is vital for a positive writing experience, but it seems common for buyers to have nib problems even with higher end pens. Why don't manufacturers do a better job of quality control for this vital component? After all, a dud nib can certainly damage a brand image and prospect of repeat purchases. Good points, Gary. I totally hear where you're coming from. I totally hear ya. The thing about fountain pens is they are writing instruments, you know what I mean? So they're not all going to be 100% perfect, like any product. And I will say, I probably have a unique perspective on this being a retailer than you might as an end user, because what you're going to see looking online, looking at people's reviews and things like that, is definitely an exaggeration of the number of problems that are out there to what there truly are. Because just human nature, you're 10 times more likely to talk about a bad experience than you are to talk about a good one. So you look at the positive reviews on our site, great. It's cool to see all those reviews. It's actually kind of abnormal that we have as many positive reviews on our site versus negative reviews out there. I think that speaks to the quality of our community that we've built. But in general, think about it, just your human nature, right? Like you're driving to work and somebody cuts you off and doesn't use a turn signal. You're like, ah, that person is going to get you in a bad mood. You're going to get to work and be like, this jerk cut me off. But all of the other days of the year, the 364 other days, assuming you work 365 days a year, whatever, you're probably driving most days, but all the other days of the year that you're driving, you're not coming into work and going, man, you know, so great. Somebody just used their turn signal and just very appropriately changed lanes in front of me this morning. It made my day. That doesn't happen, you know what I mean? So human nature is just, we're going to talk about negative things more than positive ones. That is definitely the case with fountain pens. And for me as a retailer, I have a unique perspective because we actually get a ton of feedback. Like, we troubleshoot a lot of stuff, so we know really when something is like, it needs to be cleaned or maybe tweaked a little bit, or something is just kind of that thing, versus like it's truly a defect that the manufacturer like should have made right from the first place. That percentage of issues is actually fairly small. Now that said, it does definitely happen, and I totally hear where you're coming from, especially an expensive pen. You're paying $500 for a pen, should be perfect, right? It always should be perfect, you would think. Not always the case, and there are some reasons why. So I'll get into that right now. So Fountain pen nibs, yes, they are manufactured. There are varying degrees of machines and human beings that are involved in the process, but usually with the nib tuning, kind of those final stages of making sure the pen writes well, a machine isn't going to be able to do that for you. It's a human being that has to do it. In that respect, it's very much of an instrument. Just like when you have, you know, a musical instrument that's being manufactured, the final step is always going to be playing it and make sure it sounds right. That's the same kind of thing. So you're going to have a human being that's going to write with the pen and make sure that it's tuned properly. Now, the less expensive pen is, the less human being involvement there's going to be. That's just how it is. People cost money and their time, and you know, a pen like a Lamy Safari or a Pilot Metropolitan, there's just not that much time that people are able to spend in order to keep the cost down where it is. So actually, in that respect, they're actually pretty darn good. Lamy gets a little bit of flack for their extra fine nibs, their steel extra fine nibs. And I will say there is some greater inconsistency with their extra fine nibs, and I've talked to Lamy about this, and they've said specifically, like, yeah, the machines that we use to manufacture those nibs, they can only really go down to a fine nib. In the extra fine nibs, it requires like a lot more handwork to be done to get them that way. That's why there's a lot more inconsistency with the extra fines than there is on the other nib sizes, because the machines can't get it that fine. So especially with extra fines and things like that, you're gonna see a little more inconsistency in human nature. If they only have so much time to spend on it, they're gonna try to get it good, and then it's got to ship if it's not like a total dud, total defect. So that's why you see some inconsistency there. Also, I would say that, in general, there's just fewer nib professionals out there than there used to be. Not to say that, like, yeah, if you're working on really expensive pens, you should really know what you're doing. That's certainly the case, but it's definitely not like as prolific as it used to be. It used to be that fountain pens were the way that everyone wrote, and so nib tuning and learning all that stuff was, it was kind of, I'm not going to say it was commonplace, but it was much more common than it is today for people that know how to tune and tweak them and stuff like that. I will say, from having handled a lot of returns and talked to a lot of my vendors and manufacturers and things like that about what are causing some of these issues, the vast majority of the quality issues that we do actually see with these nibs, it's a matter of simple alignment, adjusting, tuning, things like that, which on one hand is more frustrating because you're like, if it was that simple to adjust, why wasn't it done at the factory? Which is certainly like something that I ask all the time, and I try a lot on a case-by-case basis to understand what is happening. But again, human involvement, somebody was sick that day and somebody else had to replace them who wasn't as experienced. It was somebody who was new and getting trained on how to doing that stuff. Somebody just, got their eyes got crossed and they just didn't see it quite as well, there's all kinds of things that can happen when there's humans involved with quality control. So that's part of it. Another part of it too is, like, literally, I'm not joking, everybody writes with their pen in a different way. It's one of the most beautiful things about fountain pens is you get to very personalize your experience. That's why some people are so emphatic about one pen and not another one. It's because it just fits their writing style better. And yes, there's a lot of ways that can be explained as far as your pen angle, your writing speed, your pressure, all the different ways you turn it, your rotation, all these various things, the way the pen's ground, all that kind of stuff. So the way that it used to be back in the days of old, before the internet and when fountain pens were much more commonplace, it was more like, well, kind of the days of old when you buy a pair of shoes. You'd go in, you'd get your foot measured, you'd try the shoe on, you'd walk around with it, and that's how you would get your shoe that you knew was going to fit you really well. You knew there was an adjustment period, you'd have to get used to it and all that kind of stuff, but then it would break in and it would fit really nice. It's not all that different than fountain pens. Fountain pens, you would go to the store. Yes, the manufacturer has their way of doing it, and some people are just like, this is just not for me. I just can't deal with a whatever, Parker, Lamy, whatever. Because it's just the way it's ground, the way it flows, this is not for me. So people get their brand preferences. But in general, you would go to the store, you would try it out. The person behind the counter was probably pretty knowledgeable and would get trained up on how to tune nibs and stuff like that, so they could tweak and make adjustments if you preferred to have a little broader, whatever. They get it to fit your writing style. Great, you buy it, you're happy, you go. So that is much less common today, especially with the rise of the internet and so on. So that whole thing is having to be readjusted, no pun intended. So that whole idea of, you go to a store, you try it on, you buy it and get it adjusted to fit you perfectly. That's how fountain pens kind of used to be. That is not really how they are now. So I think just in general, with the way that pens are being bought and sold today, that is one drawback. And I'm exposing, you know, a major flaw in the whole online pen buying experience is you miss that. Now, we can whine and cry about that all we want. It doesn't mean that fountain pen brick and mortars are going to pop back up magically. That's just the way that the world has gone. So me being more of a futurist, forward thinker kind of guy, I'm thinking I'm not going to wham and cry about the way things used to be. I'm thinking, where are things going and what can we do using putting ourselves in the flow of technology and in the flow of the way things are going. What can we do to still keep this community very vibrant and alive and utilize it the best way possible? Like shooting videos. I can educate you. I can make products like a Goulet grip or a micro mesh or whatever and teach you how to tune your own stuff. So I'll go ahead and say, like, without making some like big declarative statement kind of thing, I'm greatly interested in getting more involved in learning how nibs are made and the tuning and tweaking. And as I learn more of that, I want to teach you more of that, because the way that I see the future going is much less of kind of this centralized model of we make this pen, it is perfect, it goes out to everyone and it stays perfect. I think much more realistically, and based on my experience and how I've seen my own fountain pen usage experience greatly enhanced as I picked up some little tweaking, expertise. If you have some just very basic understanding of how to align a nib, how to adjust it, and how to smooth it to fit your preferences, it can like 100-fold enhance your writing experience. You know, a pen that you absolutely hated, I'm not joking. I've had pens where I write it and it's scratchy right out of the box and I'm like, this is terrible. And then I adjust it, a little bit of micro mesh, I know what I'm doing, so I'm oversimplifying it, the explanation of it, but I'm not joking, in about 10 seconds, I can have it be one of my best writing pens. It's really that fine. So on one hand, it's frustrating because why isn't that done at the factory? So what I'm getting at here is sometimes it's just a personal preference thing, and what writes well to you doesn't write the same to the person that makes the pen in the factory, you know what I mean? They have their own style and you just don't like it as much. And you know, Aurora is one that comes to mind. They have in platinum, their nibs are a lot toothier. They're not as smooth. Some people would absolutely love the pens if they were just a little bit smoother. You know what I mean? So other people, the nib's too smooth and they want it to be rougher. You know, it's just a lot of it's preference thing. But yeah, I would say in general, it's that's kind of the way just things have gone as it's been harder and harder to just be a pen company anymore, because demand for fountain pens has dropped off over the last 50 years. I would say there's been a little bit of a resurgence with the rise of the internet, and folks like me and others who are getting into them and sharing them with others are helping to revitalize the community, and that's bringing more awareness about it. It doesn't change anything overnight from a manufacturing standpoint, though. It still takes a long time to get that expertise and that nib craftsmanship and stuff like that. It's really tough. It's really tough to kind of make a perfect pen. That said, it's kind of a blend, so to kind of wrap up my whole answer here, I see the future of really enjoying your pens being either a retailer like me who's super involved and is willing to test pens and tweak them and kind of maintain more of that old kind of centralized model of like, I'll tweak the pen and make sure it's great, send it to you. If you don't like it, you send it back to me, and kind of that back and forth thing, which is much less convenient than it was back in the old days. Or for you to learn more about how to tweak and adjust them, and then not have to rely on somebody else to be able to do it. That is a much more complicated thing, requires a lot more dedication and involvement in it, so it's not going to be for everybody. But that's the way that I see the future going. So I took that into a futuristic kind of question there. But yeah, I would definitely say that to wrap up your question here, it certainly can damage a brand image. And that's something that I really work hard to communicate with our manufacturers on. If we get it and we get a lot of feedback and the pen's not writing well, I'm like, guys, you got to fix this. This is not right. You know, and I'll spot check and I'll try to do what I can, but if there's a 4% defect rate on a nib and I'm spot checking a few pens, there's a good chance I'm not going to hit one of those bad nibs. You know, sometimes I'll pick it up and the first nib I pick is bad and I'm like, guys, what the heck? You know, what is going on? I'll over communicate, like, this is what I'm experiencing, here's what I'm seeing, the nib's all whacked out, what's going on? And we'll usually, in that kind of situation, if I'm getting a pen and testing and it's all writing all crazy, I'll immediately go to the manufacturer and be like, guys, this is a problem. We need to fix this. I'm going to go and test 10 pens and see if this is just a complete fluke or what's going on. But you guys need to address this now. And they'll usually get on it pretty quick because they know we know what we're doing here. But anyway, that's kind of what I got going on for that. Hopefully give you some good insights there. So to wrap up for this week, I'm going to do a question of the week. And this question of the week is going to go back to a question that I had earlier and say, what pen do you find to be the most polarizing? And where do you stand on that pen? So it could be one I brought up earlier, it could be a completely different one. I'm just curious to know, like, what, and I know this is a little bit of fire starting here, what really kind of gets you going in terms of, you know, people that are overhyped something and you're against it, or, you know, there's people out there hating something but you love it. I would just love to know, you know, specifically we'll keep it on pens because I want to keep the conversation a little narrower than blowing it up into ink, paper, and all that kind of stuff. So specifically with pens, what pen do you find the most polarizing and where do you stand on that issue? So leave that comment on YouTube or on the blog. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. A lot of great engagement. Just want to say fantastic engagement everywhere. YouTube has just been overwhelming almost for me to try to keep up with. We got our new folks, Lydia and Colin, that are both helping out, getting more active. So you're seeing some of them posting a little bit more. That is intentional. I'm trying to do that. I'm managing all my own social media channels as well as I'm really on YouTube and then kind of the blog a little bit more. I'm less on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram on our company page. I'll dip in here and there, but I really have a team that helps to manage a lot of that, but I'm always a resource for them and stuff like that. But you know, it's on a personal front and the business front, it's hard for me to manage like 15 social media channels as well as run this business and have my 2 kids and all that. So, you know, just realistically. So that's what I got going on. But that said, you should still follow all of our stuff. So if you like this video, subscribe to YouTube. Obviously, we're on the blog, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, blah, 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 all those various things. We're all over everywhere. So if you like pens, we're there. Cool, thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out with Q&A. It's been cool getting a bunch of snaps of everybody watching Q&A, very meta. Even people like with Periscope last night, and everybody's like, well, not last night, Tuesday night. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, I was just watching your Q&A and now I'm watching you live. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of cool. I'm glad to be everywhere. So it's good stuff, good stuff. Thanks for watching, I appreciate it. Appreciate your attention. I dig it, I'm honored by that. And I hope you have a fantastic weekend, a great rest of your week. And I'll see you next week. Right on.